Okay, welcome everyone. Really nice to see everyone. So good. Thank you for coming to hear Jack speak today. I know it's going to be really, really interesting. So what we're going to do is we're going to have Jack speak for 25 minutes. I'll see if there's any questions. If there's not, Jack will continue speaking for another 5 minutes. Otherwise, we'll have some question time. So as you know, I've mentioned that this is being recorded and will soon be available on our YouTube page. I will send out the link through our social media and also on the newsletter. So we're very happy to have Jack here speak with us. I'm going to spotlight him, so it will just be him. And if you have any questions, down below you've got the chat, so you can always send me a message if you don't want to ask the question, or if you have anything that you want to say. Just instead of interrupting Jack, just leave the question there and then we can do it at the 25-minute mark. So thank you very much. Thank you, Jack, for your time. Let me just spotlight you and you can start talking. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. And thank you, Joanne, for giving me the opportunity, because this is a fascinating aspect of in World War II, where there is, well, the Australian army, by their actions and the consequences of that, prevented the Nazis getting to about 1 million Jews in the Middle East, mainly Sephardi Jews. Of course, what Rommel and the Africa Corps, who were coming across via Libya. Libya was in Italian hands, and the Italians, of course, were part of the Axis. They were with the Germans, and they were sweeping across, wanting to go all the way to get the oil in well, Iraq and all the Arab countries of the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, and so on. If they had done that today, I guess people around the world would be speaking German. And that's how vital it was that they were trying to get these resources. They would have controlled the canal, the Suez Canal. All traffic coming to Australia from there would, of course, have been shut down. So let me put you in the picture of what was happening around that time. 1941, we've got the Axis powers, so German and their allies, sweeping across the world. No one was able to stand against them. You had, for example, where France fell, you have Dunkirk, you have the Battle of Britain, which was between July and October 1940, and Dunkirk, June 1940. And then you have on one side where they are sweeping across Greece, you've got October 1940 to April 41. Basically, the Greeks who are trying to stop the Germans are unable to, and so you've got the forces coming through from the German forces, and they sweep across. Part of Greece had been put in the hands of the Italians, but they were not fighting so well over there. And it's only when the Germans came and took over that, in fact, Greece fell in April 41. So please remember that year, 1941, the whole world was very anxious, the West, because our forces were just collapsing everywhere. And the future was unknown. The Jews were being rounded up, of course, the Holocaust, concentration camps, and so on. In fact, even the Eastern Front with Russia was opened up in June 1941. So the Germans were very much, Hitler, very much wanting to have that 1,000-year Reich and to basically conquer and control the whole world. You even have Pearl Harbor, December 1941, where the Japanese attack the American forces in Pearl Harbor, and this is when America came into the war effort. Now, the Africa Corps under the, General, Field Marshal General Erwin Rommel, who was known as the Desert Fox, and he was very much loved by the German people. He had been very successful and a very good general and very much loved. And he is sweeping across. The Allies had been able to push the Italians into Libya. Libya was a colony of Italy, and they were able to push them back. But the moment the Africa Corps comes across, again, they are so powerful with their very modern weapons for the time, and they push back the Allies who keep on falling back. Let me tell you where I come into that story, I guess. My family were in Alexandria, in Egypt. And next to Libya, you've got Egypt. And you have about 100,000 Jews in Egypt. And of course, as the forces, the Nazis are advancing, there is great anxiety and apprehension in Egypt. I was born after the war, 1946, and I guess I'm about 9, 10 years of age. And we were on the road, the coastal road, going to a resort. And at one stage, my father stopped the car and he said, "Jack, I want you to come and see this." I said, "Oh, okay." And he took me to a cemetery, the cemetery at El Alamein. And as far as the eye could see, I could see graves. And as I walked across, I could see that they were young men. They were barely just a few years older than me, 18, 19, 20, all dead in 1941, 42. And my father, with a sweep of his hand, showed me, he said, "It is thanks to these men, these brave men, that we are alive." And this has stayed with me. This has really stayed with me. And he told me the story of how the Africa Corps sweeping across, coming towards Egypt, where the family lived, were at one stage stopped at Tobruk. And you've got to think that Tobruk was a vital port because it was a deep sea port. So from Tripoli in Libya, then Benghazi, they're all deep ports which could be reprovisioned from Germany with weapons, oil, etc. Tobruk was absolutely vital because it was then 1,000 kilometers to Alexandria. Alexandria was the next deep sea port. And of course, what the Germans wanted was to sweep all the way to Saudi Arabia, get all the oil. In the way, they would have got also to Palestine, as it was called then, and Jerusalem. No doubt about it. And you've got to think that Hitler had already prepared the way. He had a pact with the Mufti of Jerusalem. So the Muslim forces were getting ready for a bloodbath. Basically, it would have been an absolute slaughter. They just needed for the Germans to be there, and they would have been set free with their knives, cutting everybody they could, every Jew in Palestine, in Jerusalem, but right through the whole Middle East. And I'm talking maybe more than 1 million Jews would have been caught by the Nazis, who would have sent the Jews to Auschwitz. Very much the same as what happened in Salonika, where a Sephardi community of 50,000 were taken all the way to Auschwitz. Only about less than 5% of the 50,000 survived. Just terrible times and so on. So the forces were advancing. And by the way, I should also say that in Iraq, you had, of course, what was called the Farhud, where on the 1st of June 1941, after the British forces had taken over Iraq, in the aftermath of that time, there was a terrible pogrom, and the mobs just went crazy, and many Jews were killed in their homes and so on. So the fate of Jews was sealed as far as you could see the future. Tobruk was given to the 9th Division of the Australian Defence Force. It was an infantry division, and they were given the task with New Zealand forces and some British to prevent the Allies getting the deep sea port of Tobruk. And they set about to put all kinds of reinforcements, and of course the Nazis troops soon arrived with the Italians, by the way. And the bombardment started. It was the bombardment. The Italians had a huge amount of artillery guns, and the bombardment was incessant day and night. You also had the Stuka planes. These are the dive bombers, the German latest equipment of the time, just dive bombing and dropping their bombs. You had all kinds of attacks being carried on. And so the Australian troops who had to defend this port and were cut off from, no way to retreat, had no way to protect themselves but to dig underneath. And so they dug all these tunnels, and that's where they managed to survive. They survived the siege of Tobruk for 242 days. So imagine constant bombardment. 5,000 Australian troops died, by the way, between Tobruk and later on El Alamein. And the only thing that was helping the Australian troops were that the British ships were offshore bombarding the Allied troops. The Axis, the German troops. 42 ships were sunk, by the way, by the various submarines, U-boats, etc. Because
Sorry, Jack, sorry to interrupt you. Can I just confirm, when you said 42 ships were sunk, were they Allies or were the Axis?
Allies.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you.
Thanks. No. Yeah, 42 of the Australian British ships were sunk, with the huge number of losses of sailors, of course. And but the fact that they held that place for 242 days meant that the German forces were not able to reprovision easily. They had to actually travel all the way from Tripoli and Benghazi. So you had thousands of kilometers of open desert road, which then the planes, the RAAF planes flying from Malta could attack. So, but they needed that port, and it took a long time. But finally, the Australian troops were allowed to leave. They left at night by ship. The ships were being bombarded during that time as well by the Axis forces, but they managed to get the Aussies off. The fact that they kept them back meant that when Rommel finally came to Egypt, he was not fully prepared. He didn't have all his ammunition. He didn't have all the weapons that would have been, that he needed. One thing, by the way, I should say about Rommel, he had been given instructions by Hitler as he swept across Libya and heading to Egypt to round up the Jews in these places. And there would have been, well, you have all these, in Libya, there would have been at least 100,000 Jews. And Rommel refused. And later on, by the way, he was forced to commit suicide by Hitler, although it was for other reasons. And it wasn't that Rommel loved the Jews or wanted to protect them. It's just he didn't want to waste his time, his abilities on other than the war. Anyway, so in, when was it, 1942, finally, you have the forces that are in El Alamein. And that is about 100 kilometers from where my parents live. Imagine from Geelong to Melbourne. So you have the forces that have swept right through all around the world. They're only 100 kilometers from Alexandria. And was the 1st of July, 1942, the first Battle of El Alamein, and the second one on the 23rd of October, 1942. My father says that that night of the 23rd of October, at 10 p.m., all of a sudden the sky just lit up like daylight. And then the sound of the guns. And it was the Allies that were actually counter-attacking and hitting the Axis forces. The battle was ferocious. And it lasted 2 days. I came across a soldier that I met later on in Melbourne. And the stories of that battle were unbelievable. Of his battalion, some 700 went in and only 50 came back. Many wounded, but also majority killed. It was a huge battle. And the Axis forces were defeated. And Rommel was actually stopped 100 kilometers from my parents' home. So it would have been 2008, the year 2008. And I hear that there is a march to be done at the War Memorial by the Rats of Tobruk. Now, I missed telling you that when the Australian forces in Tobruk had dug underneath to protect themselves from all this bombardment, they were mocked by Lord Ho-Ho, who was on the radio from Berlin. And they were mocked as the Rats of Tobruk, who were in the sewers underneath. But of course, Australians took it as a badge of honor. They had survived 242 days of bombardment by digging underneath. And that became their name. They took it on. They said, yes, we are the Rats of Tobruk. And so when the 2nd 24th Regiment was to march in Melbourne in 2008, I had to be there. I went there. It was the 10th of April. And of course, by then, many were quite elderly, some pushed on wheelchairs, some on walking sticks. They all very proudly wore their medals. And with the standard showing Rats of Tobruk, they marched. And then afterwards, there was a group of them standing there talking of their valiant days, the battles that they did. And I broke into the conversation. And I said to them, you know, it's thanks to you guys that I'm alive. And the conversation went dead quiet. And they looked at me, you know. And I explained to them, I said, look, My parents lived in Alexandria. What you guys did was to stop the Nazis coming across. And being Jewish, my parents would have finished in Auschwitz. It is thanks to what you did in Tobruk and in Alamein that I'm alive. The tallest one there, ramrod straight, over 6'3", looked at me and tears were flowing down his eyes. And he put his arms around me and we held each other. It was a moment, you know, just one of these things. And after that, Richard Scales and myself became very good friends. He loved his whiskey. I would bring him a bottle of whiskey every so often. We'd go, himself, his wife, and bring them to lunch at RSL clubs and so on. I was invited to his 90th birthday in Wangaratta, where I met his whole family. We became absolute best friends. And unfortunately, he passed away in 2014. But it was so good that I had the chance to thank him. In fact, I even organized for B'nai B'rith to do an honor meeting where himself and his commander were actually honored with a certificate by B'nai B'rith to thank them for what they had done at that time. So it's something which I wanted to let you know because it's this battle and the work done by the Australian troops prevented the Nazis getting their hands, as I said, on close to 1 million Jews, mainly Sephardi Jews, and all Jews from Iraq and from Libya, from ultimately even Morocco, but certainly from Egypt and Palestine, Israel, would all have perished.
That is amazing, Jack. So I just want to just say this is just absolutely fascinating. And most of the people online listening to you speak are actually from Egypt. So I think many of them will what you've been talking will resonate with them from a personal point of view. My father, who's on the call at the moment, I know that his name and his brother's name were on the list that Rommel had of all the Jews in Egypt. I'm really glad that you answered the question about the rats, because I was always wanting to know where they got the name of the rats of Tobruk. So thank you for that. I have a couple of questions and then I'll see if anyone else has. So if you have, I've still got you on mute, so just give me a hand wave. I just wanted to, where was I? When Rommel came, did he come, like as he said, by the time that the rats of Tobruk had really given him a bit of a hard time, so by the time he got to Egypt, he wasn't quite prepared. Can you give us a rough idea of how many troops came with him to get to Egypt? Are we looking at a few thousand or 100,000 or how many troops?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I haven't got that.
Oh, okay, that's okay.
Information, but it would be hundreds of thousands. Yeah.
Okay, and the other thing is what my husband wanted to know. Why were the Salonika Jews sent to Auschwitz and Poland? Why didn't they just go and set up their own death camp close by and just round up all the local Jews and just kill them all there, all the Mediterranean Jews? Why send them off to Poland? Do we know?
Look, Auschwitz, Treblinka were death factories.
That they were just running so efficiently, it was just worth sending them all up there?
Where they could kill by the tens of thousands a day, yes.
Okay.
So it was a system. So they, yeah, and in fact, it was a terrible journey because you can imagine that from Greece,
it would have been days to get there.
It was about 6 days in wagons, about 70 to the cattle wagon. Many didn't survive because they were hardly given any water or food. The dead were just, when the train stopped at stations, were just
terrible.
Yeah. So,
I've got, sorry.
Yeah, no.
I've got Ron here. I just want to make sure I get to some questions. Ron's got a question. Ron, I've unmuted you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi. Thank you very much. That's very interesting. My dad was there as well. It was actually the 8th Army, and there were also, my father was a German refugee, and he joined the army, and he went north there, and he was stationed for a few years along North Africa and Egypt and so on. And because his native language was German, one of his jobs was to interrogate German prisoners taken. And I still have a book taken from a German officer. It's quite a thick book, full of maps and German, Arabic phrases, translation, full of maps where there's water, towns, things like that. I've still got it, which my father didn't give back. He was a naughty boy. And then because my father came also from Stuttgart, which is where Rommel came from, Rommel's son was called Manfred, and Manfred became the Lord Mayor of Stuttgart in Germany. And he invited my father and other Jews from Stuttgart, gave them a free trip as a part of saying a sorry kind of a thing in the late 1980s. And all these German Jews from Stuttgart came to Lord Mayor Rommel's hosting. It was about, I think, 5 or 6 days. So then the other question you asked about why they didn't put up a death camp there, well, they had plans to, and the people that were going to do it were the Palestinian Arabs under Alamein Husseini, and he had correspondence with I think it was Burri, and they were going to put up death camps with gas chambers in Shem, near just outside Nablus. And that was thwarted because, of course, they lost. But they were going to sweep right across North Africa and get to Palestine, and then put up the death camp around Nablus, which is today Nablus Shem. So it was on their plan. It was definitely on their plan. And they had an SS, a Muslim SS unit that had been formed as well. And in their correspondence, which still survives, Goering said words to the effect to Amin al-Husseini said to him, we are very close to you, we have the same ideology, and of course you will be part of us. The fact of the matter is they're not Aryans, but it suited the Nazis to have them as close allies.
Mm. No, thank you, Ron. Yes, it's they didn't get a chance, the Nazis, to finish with their plans, and they had prepared the whole ground in advance, even in Baghdad, Iraq, where the dictator there had been pushed out by the British forces in May 1941. It was the 9th Division. 9th Division, actually.
Oh, 9th Division, the 8th Army I'm talking about.
The 8th Army, yes.
Yeah.
I had mentioned the 9th Division.
Yeah, my dad was in the 9th Division. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, right, that's the one.
Yeah.
And yeah, just fascinating times, which, you know, history is sort of sweeping aside, being forgotten, but so vital for the survival of Jews in the Middle East, but ultimately allowing Israel to be established, because if the Germans had got there, there's no way that we would have had an Israel today, even if they had been pushed back ultimately by you know,
definitely. I'll just see, does anyone else, if you have a question, maybe put up your hand? Marcel, I'm just going to unmute you. Okay, just unmute yourself, Marcel. I've just put a, we can't hear you, Marcel.
No, she's still muted.
Yeah, I know. There she is. Okay, Marcel, ask your question, please.
It's not a question, just a fact. I know none of you was born or was there at that time.
Mm-hmm.
I was a young girl there, and I'm a witness. First, you know, the atmosphere was terrible in Egypt. The war was raging in Tobruk, and we were sure 100% that the German would win. And you could see everybody was so depressed. This stayed with me till today. to see the people depressed. I didn't realize the gravity of the war, but the older people knew about it. It was very dangerous.
It's been very scary as well, Marcel.
Very scary, and you see everybody depressed around you.
Well, especially that the war was only 100 k's away from.
Well,
from
we were lucky. We were lucky to be in Cairo.
Yeah,
The people who lived in Alexandria suffered more than we did.
definitely.
Well,
Definitely.
yes, Marcel, I just want to tell you, I asked my father, what were we going to do? You know, there was this terrible battle that we saw at Alamein.
Where were your parents living? In Alexandria?
Alexandria, yes, yes.
So they suffered.
Actually, my parents hadn't yet married, so my mother was in Cairo, but my father in Alexandria. And I asked my father, what were we going to do? Because he said, oh, we had packed the car with our belongings. And I said, where were we going to go? He said, no idea. We didn't know. We had nowhere to go, nowhere to go.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up soon. Does Claude, did you have a question, or mum or dad? No? Okay.
Where did Jack gather all his information from? His father or
Jack, do you want to just answer that? Did you get all this information from studying or just from your dad?
From my dad, some of it, some from picking up here and there from the internet, but a lot of it from my meeting and conversations with Charlie Aghion, and hearing his stories. Maybe just one tiny little anecdote, if you allow me.
Please.
That he was there in the midst of that battle in the heat, the desert in El Alamein. And all of a sudden, as he's fighting there, he is hit in the back, and he assumes by a bullet. And the force sends him into the ground. And he can feel this fluid coming through, and he thinks it's his blood. He thinks he's had it. It turns out that the bullet had actually hit the jerry can, the water can that he had in his haversack on his back. And so the bullet, they didn't use the high velocity bullets that we have these days. And the bullet was stopped by the haversack and the bottle, the metal water bottle. And so he lost all of the water, and he knew that he wouldn't be able, in the heat of the battle, wouldn't be able to get any water for quite some time. And he was furious that he had lost the water. The fact that it saved his life doesn't seem to matter that much, but he had lost the water in the middle of the desert, and he was very angry.
Wow, that sounds fascinating. Jack, you know, we could sit here for hours and ask you more questions. This has just been so incredible. And we're going to have another talk with Jack in April after Pesach. And I think that will be fascinating. This has just been so good. Thank you, Jack, for your time. You know, I know that everyone's going to be enjoying this. It will be uploaded soon on our YouTube channel. So for those who have missed it, because I know a lot of people really wanted to hear you speak, and they can catch up with it at a later time. So thank you so much for your generous time and talking to us, sharing all of this, because I just found it fascinating, and I'm sure everyone else did. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to see everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, and I wish you a good afternoon, and I'll see everyone soon. Oh, don't forget, we've got the event tonight, so I'm sure I'll be seeing some of you tonight then. Okay, thank you again. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Joanne.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Bye.
Bye.